For many viewers, the end of the Marvel Cinematic Universe came with Tony Stark's unfortunate death in 2019's Avengers Endgame. However, bringing back one Stark we haven't seen since Endgame could be the answer to the MCU's less than stellar ratings for Phase 4. Morgan Stark, Tony and Pepper's darling kid, was born within the time gap of 5 years. Her catchphrase, "I love you 3000, became an instant classic, and her character was important in Tony's development as a leader.
Love you tons.
I love you 3000.
He wasn't ready to give up everything he'd accomplished because of her. Therefore, he was hesitant to bring back the trillions of lives that had been lost. Morgan was well liked, but she was just a MacGuffin in the grand scheme of things. Her plan was to create some doubt in Tony's mind and increase the emotional impact of his death. Catherine Langford, not young Lexi Rabe, performed the part in a cutscene from Endgame for Morgan's character.
I mean, I'm such a huge fan of the Marvel films and the Russo brothers, so when Marvel reached out to me to play Iron Man's daughter, I was just like, that was such an honor, and ultimately I didn't make it into the film, and creatively, like, that makes sense, and, you know, that's totally fine. I was just content with, like, having the memory in my head, you know, to play with, like, Robert Downey Jr. in the last scene. He was Iron Man. On the last day, he was Iron Man. That was just, like, amazing.
Langford may have been established for future films if Tony had met his now adult daughter in the Soul Realm. We haven't run into her since then, and unfortunately, no one has ever brought up her name. Or is it that Marvel has completely forgotten about the young Stark girl? The problem that Phase 4 has been having is that all of our familiar heroes are slipping away. But Morgan Stark's reappearance in either Avengers Kang Dynasty or Secret Wars could rectify this. After Endgame, Stark, Captain America, and Black Widow were no longer around. These are 3 major Avengers characters, and continuing the franchise without them, or at least other characters that could replace them, will do the Marvel Cinematic Universe no good. Hawkeye's successor has been identified in his own Disney Plus series, but that still isn't good enough. Both Thor and Hulk were prominent in Phase 4, yet their respective stories and personalities hinted that the heroes' time on the franchise was limited. Phase 4 flooded the MCU with new heroes, and while many were warmly received, Marvel has had a hard time developing characters to their full potential when there are so many stories to tell. The good news is having Morgan as the living legacy of the late, great Tony Stark may be a breath of new air for the future of the MCU. There have been many speculations as to whether or not another Tony Stark would appear in this multiversal saga. Some have speculated that Earth 838 Stark, seeking vengeance against the Illuminati, might travel to Earth 616. This was something many people expected to happen in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Bringing Tony back into the MCU would be terrible, lazy fan service that could damage Stark's reputation. His heroic death was fitting, so let's just leave him in the grave. But his kid? She seems like the ideal candidate to carry on Tony's work and inherit his armor. She would bond with Peter Parker, who is experiencing similar challenges as they both struggle to cope with the fallout of his mistakes and measure up to his lofty expectations. Morgan did make an appearance in the comics, but she looks significantly different there than she does in the show. But why is that, you ask? Well, for those who didn't read the Iron Man comics, Morgan Stark is a male character, not Tony's daughter. Howard Stark once said that a daughter is preferable to a son since there is less chance she'll turn out exactly like him. This happens when Tony sees him in the past in Endgame and tells him he has a small daughter.
I have a little girl.
A girl would be nice. Less of a chance she'd turn out exactly like me.
What'd be so awful about that? Let's just say that the greater good has rarely outweighed my own self-interest.
Tony now knows he is just like his father and is grateful he did not reproduce the family's dysfunction by having a son. It also sheds light on the reasoning behind the movie's gender reversal. The MCU's decision to make Morgan Stark a female character in the live adaptation is not the first time that the gender of a comic book character has been changed. Carrie-Anne Moss's character, Jerry Hogarth, in the now cancelled Netflix Marvelverse, was originally portrayed as a man. Ghost, the antagonist turned anti-hero of Ant-Man and the Wasp, was portrayed by Hannah John Kamen in the film adaptation, despite originally appearing as a male in the comics. The Kree scientist Mar-Vell, who stumbled upon Earth, and Carol Danvers, was a male in the books, but played by Annette Bening in the films. Tilda Swinton plays a female version of the Ancient One from the comics, but the character is male in the films. The Ancient One was the previous Sorcerer Supreme and custodian of the Time Stone before Stephen Strange. So, seeing Morgan become a female character in the Avengers shouldn't come as a surprise. You should also know that Morgan Stark takes her name from Pepper's uncle. Tony tells Pepper in Avengers Infinity War about a dream he had in which they had a child they named Morgan. 5 years later into the plot, they have a daughter named Morgan in Avengers Endgame.
Last night, I dreamt we had a kid. So real. We named him after your eccentric uncle. What was his name?
Right.
Morgan. Morgan.
So you woke up and thought that
Naturally.
we were,
Expecting.
yeah,
Yes?
no.
I had a dream about it. It was so real.
If you wanted to have a kid, you wouldn't have done that.
Technically, Tony's dream and Pepper's uncle inspired her name. Morgan is a beautiful name for a girl, but obviously naming her after a male relative is a surefire recipe for a bullied childhood. Lexi Rabe portrays Morgan Stark in Avengers Endgame. The name Lexi Rabe is used in the Endgame credits, however, Alexandra Rachel Rabe has been used in the past. She is slated to reappear in the next monster hit Godzilla King of Monsters. In what seems like a flashback or prologue sequence, she'll play a younger version of Millie Bobby Brown's character, Madison Russell.
Well, I'm little Millie Bobby Brown. In the flashback, though, I'm not that big of a wolf.
Being a child actor in an Avengers film, but having no one know you're in it until the movie comes out because of spoilers can't be easy. Now that the news is out, Rabe will be represented by the Green Room management. That being said, there's one more thing that you need to know about Morgan in the comics. Comic book Tony Stark has a cousin named Morgan Stark, who is the offspring of Edward Stark, the nephew of Howard and Maria Stark. In the comics, Morgan is a fierce competitor of Tony's and constantly plots to overthrow him as CEO of Stark Industries. It's a bit of a leap to go from being someone's male cousin to their daughter, but the writers made the right move since the Morgan of the comics is really unpleasant, and Tony needed a daughter to elevate the stakes in Endgame and fulfill the desire he had in Infinity War. Did you also know that in the comics, Morgan plays the role of a villain? Yep, the comic book Morgan's hatred for Tony is the driving force behind his villainous actions. Like Justin Hammer, he tries to tear Tony down by using his infinite privilege and resources. He employs a band of mercenaries known as the Stockpile to breach into Tony's workshop and steal all of his Iron Man armor in the Good Is Gone storyline. And in the story arc Dark Reign, he pretends to be an absent-minded Tony Stark in an effort to seize control of Stark Industries. The Morgan Stark depicted in the comics is nothing but bad news, unlike the kind and sweet Morgan in Avengers Endgame. Nonetheless, Morgan Stark is not completely a bad guy in the Ultimate Marvel continuity. He's definitely no hero, but he's not out to destroy Tony Stark either. In one Ultimate Marvel narrative, a band of outlaws from Guatemala kidnaps Tony, Morgan, and a few other heroes. It turns out that the Red Devil is in charge of these crooks. They're holding the captives for ransom, and they're not letting them go until Tony gives them his technology. So, Tony fashions some crude armor and rescues the hostages, but not in time to save Morgan. With that being said, let's see if Marvel will continue bringing the female Morgan Stark back into the MCU. It could prove to be a crucial move in the future.